Do. Hey, everybody. Come on in here. Grab your beverages. It's time for Coffee with Scott Adams. Those of you who are quick on the fingers and have already joined, do I look tired? I am tired. I've got a leak in my roof, and it's raining. So I was up late. Yeah, that's good. How about another one? Drink your coffee. Well, I've got lots of topics today. Lots of topics. Let's talk first about President Trump saying, of course, he'd love to be interviewed by the special counsel. What do you make of that? Of course, I'd like to be interviewed by the special counsel. Oh, is that exactly what he said? Because if I remember listening to the quote, it sounded more like this. I would love to be interviewed by the special counsel, assuming my lawyer, agrees. Did you hear the second part? Yeah, that's how you agree to talk to a special prosecutor. You do it this way. Mr. President, would you like to speak to the special counsel? Here's how you answer this correctly. Absolutely. I totally want to talk to the special counsel. As long as my lawyers say it's okay. Did you catch that? Are the lawyers going to say it's okay? Maybe. If they do say it's okay, they're going to tell him, don't talk about your intentions. If you caught Alan Dershowitz last night, you know that was his advice, essentially, that a president doesn't have to say what's in his mind as long as what he's doing is his job description. So hiring and firing the people under his purview is the job of president. Delving into his mental state for doing it is something that I suppose you have to do for a normal crime, but the constitutional separation of powers makes that a different question for the president. Can one part of the government tell the president how to do his job? Well, if you can question his intentions, effectively some other part of the government does do his job. He can say, I want to hire this person, and some other part of the government can say, yeah, you say you want to do it just because they're good for the job, but I think you're thinking that person will let you off for a crime someday, or whatever. So here's another little tip. Suppose you were accused of a crime, and it looks like it might go to trial, and you're the subject of a lot of scrutiny. And somebody comes to you and says, will you take a lie detector test? And let's say that you're sort of being interviewed in public, you're a famous criminal, and people come to you and say, will you take a lie detector test? What is the correct answer? What is the correct answer to will you take a lie detector test? Many of you are getting this answer wrong. Now, the people saying no, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking to yourself that lie detectors are not scientifically valid, and there's a reason that they're not allowed in court. So courts, at least in the United States, don't allow lie detector tests. So let me tell you what is the correct answer to, Mr. Accused Criminal, will you take a lie detector test to show your innocence? Here's the correct answer. Hell yes, I will. I will totally take a lie detector test. Bring it on. Bring me that lie detector test. And then you add this. I'll have to look into it a little bit just to make sure they're accurate, but assuming that they're accurate, I am definitely taking that test. Assuming they're accurate. Are they accurate? No, they're not even allowed in court. Of course they're not accurate. It's somewhere between pseudoscience and science, in the sense that you can actually trick people who are guilty into acting more guilty than they normally would act because of the scientific setting, and that does cause a lot of people who are liars to out themselves as liars. But it's not that accurate. So if somebody says, will you take a lie detector test, you say unambiguously and as quickly as you can, yes, yes, bring me the lie detector test. Obviously, I'll have to ask my lawyer if these are accurate tests, but totally, I want that test. Give me the test. Because in that scenario, very much like what President Trump very stably, brilliantly did, he told the public he's willing to take the test, which makes you think, whoa, if he's willing to testify, he has nothing to hide. If he's willing to take a lie detector test, he has nothing to hide. Sure, some evil lawyer may tell him he shouldn't do it, and then he's going to follow his lawyer's advice, but he told the public that he's willing to take it. He has his cake, and he eats it too. All right. So don't get too excited about the president agreeing to be interviewed. If he does agree to be interviewed, he'll probably wall off, what was his state of mind from what did he do. What he did was he fired Comey. And if they say, did you fire Comey? Well, they don't even need to ask that question. Right? And let's drink to that. Lie detectors and special prosecutors. Let's talk about Oprah. Did you see, there's a little thing about Oprah here. It says, I'll read the headline, you can't see it. So prior to her giving her rousing speech at the Golden Globes, Oprah had been interviewed, and the interview is just surfacing. And in that interview, prior to the Golden Globes, where she acted sort of presidential, she was asked if she would run for president, and Oprah said, quote, I don't have the DNA for a presidential run. In other words, she said, no, I don't want to run for president. No, that's not for me. Now, what is the right answer when you're, say, a celebrity, not a politician, and somebody asks you if you want to run for president? If you don't want to run for president, the correct answer is, no, that's not for me. I don't have the DNA for that. That's if you don't want to run for president. If you do want to run for president, what's the correct answer? The same. No, I don't have the DNA for that. I'd never run for that. Why? Because if you're a non-politician, the one and only situation that you would run is if you're drafted into it by an overwhelming act of the public. In other words, if the public, produces an opinion poll that says 80% of them would vote for you for president, you can become president without saying you want to be president. You can say, well, the public wanted me to do it. Here's how you would further that, keeping your options open. You would give a speech at the Golden Globes in which it sounded exactly like you were running for president, while still maintaining, no, I would never run for president. I certainly wouldn't do that. Because what happens is your name and running for president just keep getting paired, and your reputation keeps going up while you've put no skin in the game. People probably are not going to produce any opposition research if you're just saying, no, I don't want to run. But they might produce opposition research if you say you want to. So you should say you don't want to and see if the public drafts you. Now, I don't think that the public will draft her with enough of a mandate that she would run. But if you've seen the opinion polls, I think she's already beating Trump in an opinion poll. Now, don't make anything of that, because in a real election, Trump would tear her apart, as would any other politician. So you really haven't seen Oprah the politician. You've only seen Oprah the celebrity. Oprah the celebrity is solid gold. Everybody loves Oprah the celebrity. How could you not love Oprah the celebrity? But Oprah the candidate suddenly is going to get really problematic, and it will happen fast. So I would ignore any polls on that subject. Speaking of polls, let's talk about Trump and DACA and immigration. Here's a question for you. If I were to put together a comprehensive immigration proposal, listen carefully, in which we're considering all the components from, building a wall, which I'm going to generalize to improving the border, right? If you give funding for improving border security, the physical security, the president and everybody who's a smart observer has said, well, it's only a wall in some parts and you're not going to do it all on the first month, etc. So the wall, or really just border fortification, is one question. The DACA folks is another. The lottery is another versus merit-based system. I'm not sure what else is on the table right now. So here's the question for you. Oh, chain migration, right. So you got chain migration, lottery, DACA decision, and physical border security, of which some part of that needs to be the wall for the president to say yes. I'm not sure if E-Verify is quite in the conversation, is it? But let's throw that in there. Let's throw E-Verify in there. Here's the question. How many of the things I just mentioned, if described the way I describe them, specifically I'm describing the wall as really a series of border decisions that really depend on the terrain and when you're doing it and stuff. So if you call that the wall, how many of those individual parts would poll at over 60% approval with the public? So let me say it again. So which of these things I'm going to mention that are involved with immigration would poll at over 60% support? The wall, which really means different border security, just tighter, all right? If we're being honest about it, it's different solutions depending on the terrain. DACA, E-Verify, chain migration, end of the lottery, and merit-based system. How many of them would poll at over 60%? I think the right answer is all of them. All except E-Verify? That's possible. So I don't know about E-Verify, but let me suggest this. So the country is hopelessly deadlocked on this question. All right, here I'm going to make a really important point that I use a lot. So if you grab just this narrow point, it's going to explain a lot about how I explain things. In these big questions, and I say big questions whether it's abortion or immigration or going to war, the really big questions, to some extent healthcare, although that's a little more of a technical question. Would you agree that for the big questions that could tear the country apart, because those questions, if you get them wrong, could really be civil war, right? If you get abortion wrong, you get, there's just a number of things if you get wrong, people are going to hit the streets. In those types of questions, of which immigration is clearly one, immigration is definitely people marching the streets kind of a question. What you need to do to get a satisfying result that keeps the republic whole and keeps people off the streets is credibility. All right? That one word, credibility, is insanely important for your government. So government needs to not just get the right answer, it needs to have an answer that the people who lost still find credible. Because whatever you do with immigration, a whole bunch of people, whether it's 40% or however many, are not going to love it. They're going to say, I don't love that. The only way the people who don't like the result can still get on board, not with agreement, but at least they don't march in the streets and ask for an overthrow of the government, is if your decision-making process is credible. Let me suggest the most credible way to get to a solution on immigration with all those various factors, from the wall or whatever border security they improve, to DACA, to chain migration, to E-Verify, to the lottery, to merit system. How about you propose, let's say whether you're the president or any other politician, that anything that's polling over 60% with the public is in. If it's over 60% with the public, and you'd have to do a few polls to, make sure you're asking the questions right, because if you ask the question wrong, you get the wrong answer, right? But if you came up with a package that says 60% sort of a supermajority, you might call it. If a supermajority of 60% of the public is in favor of any one of those things, put it on the plan. Because that plan, even though a lot of people are not going to like a lot of the parts, you're always going to have that situation. No matter what you get to, 40% of the country is going to be pretty unhappy. So come up with a plan that takes the pressure off the president, off the Congress, off Republicans, off Democrats, and just look to the people and say, look, we have described these things as well as we need to. Everybody knows what a lottery is. You know what merit-based is, roughly speaking. You know what the idea is. And the public wants us by 60% plus for all these solutions. So let's build immigration that has the greatest credibility. The best credibility is the one that 60% of the public likes each part. Polls are not ideal, but if you did a variety of polls and you made sure that you're asking the question right, and this is why I'm saying 60%. If I told you, let's do everything that has a 51% approval, I'd say that's a little bit credible, but not nearly good enough. A 60% approval of anything means there are 50% more people who are on that side than the other side. 50%. That's a big number. Slippery slopes for other things. Well, I think I never buy the slippery slope argument. See, the reason that single payer is a slightly different situation is healthcare is a little bit more of a technical problem, and it's one that the public doesn't understand. Immigration is a weird, very special situation in which the public does understand the questions. They kind of know what a wall is. They know what chain migration is. They know what E-Verify is. If, in 10 seconds they can figure it out. They know what a lottery system is. They know what merit-based is in concept. But if you say healthcare, there are so many moving parts and it's so technical that the most credible decision on healthcare is not the one the public likes. That situation's a little different. The most credible decision for healthcare might be one that's similar to another country that's getting it right. It might be the right kind of experts were involved who are not industry pawns. That might give you credibility. You might say, let's do small trials in one state, see how that works for 2 years, and then spread it to the rest of the country. That would be a way to get credibility. But in healthcare, it's just too many variables, too many parts. The public is not really going to be expected to understand the healthcare decisions. Who decides what is credible? I would argue that it's usually obvious. Now, of course, there must be situations where it's not obvious. But in the case where there's something that the public understands, and that would be the case with these immigration subtopics, we do understand these issues. They're simple. In that case, allowing the public to get what they want, because they've had a long time to think about this stuff, that feels like the most credible decision. In the case of abortion, for example, I've argued that the most credible law is one that most women approve of, because women are closer to it. They have all the scientific and news information that everybody else has, but they're also closer to it. I mean, they've got another sense of the topic that men just can't have, never will have. So even if men are on the same side as women, it's the most credible decision is the one where most women are in favor of it, whichever way that goes. You know, the most credible decision for a military strike, let's say the country's decided we will go to war, the most credible way to do that would be whatever the military generals say is the best way to do that. So every situation has a credible approach, and you recognize it when you see it. Now take another example. Take climate change. Climate change, independent of whether the majority of scientists are correct or incorrect. All right, we don't need to have that debate at the moment. But no matter whether the scientists are correct or incorrect, the current situation with that debate is that their consensus opinion is not credible. It's believed by many people, but by its nature, because the people who are on the same side are also on the same side with money. In other words, if everybody on one side is also the only people who are getting money for their opinions, indirectly through grants and through the fact that you would get drummed out of the business if you were a contrarian, that's not credible by its nature. They could be right, which is a separate question. So credibility and being accurate and being right are very separate. Does the public trust all the scientists who are, respectable scientists who have done the work? A lot of people don't. And I would argue that they probably are not crazy, because if the only experts are also on the same side with the money, you're not credible and there's nothing you can do about it. If you could somehow take the money out of it and still got exactly the same outcome, I'd say, well, that's starting to look credible. Might not be right, but at least it would be credible. You want to hear why? One reason that climate models are not credible, right? Again, independent of whether they're accurate, right? So we don't have to argue whether they're accurate. Let's just argue about whether they're credible. All right. If you do an economic projection and you do not compare path A to path B, you have not done an economic forecast. Let me say it again. If you do an economic forecast in which you say what one alternative would do, if there are lots of alternatives to what to do with your money, for example. Let's take an example of how to invest. Let's say you're a company and you want to maybe invest in something. If all you do is measure what happens if you invest that money in that one thing, you haven't measured anything. Because that one thing is just one of the things you could do. You have to compare it to the next best alternative. If all you've done is study a thing, you haven't studied anything. Now take climate change. Climate change says if the climate goes wild, we're going to have these number of problems. The sea level will rise, the temperature will rise, this will happen to vegetation, water, climate, hurricanes, etc. So science has only gone that far. Here's what they haven't studied. What if you took that same money, the trillions of dollars that you would need to remediate as aggressively as you need to, suppose you cut it in half. And you did remediating because maybe we agree that you need to do some of that. But you take the other half and use it for fixing stuff that got broken. In other words, if we have to relocate some mansions inland, what does that do? It means some rich people are going to be paying some extra money, and some poor people are going to get some extra jobs. Because if you have great dislocation, and most of the things that get dislocated are rich people's stuff, what's that going to do to poor people? Give them jobs, right? Now, some people will not get jobs, and maybe their farmland will be destroyed, and they're just out of luck. But if you haven't done the analysis of what would happen if you spent all your money, trillions of dollars remediating, versus, and here's the important part, the alternative, spending the same amount of money fixing whatever gets broken as it gets broken by climate change. Let's say you went hog wild in desalinization. Let's say you went hog wild in planting some new forests. Let's say you went hog wild in just making sure that everybody had a self-driving electric car. I don't know if that's actually good for the planet or not, but these are just examples. So if you have scientists coming to you say, we have determined that these bad things will happen to the climate, and although we haven't done the math, we see that this might cost billions of dollars in problems, give us $1 trillion. What have they analyzed? Nothing. Nothing has been analyzed. This is not an analysis. This is half of analysis. The other half is what would you do with the money if you weren't doing that? All right? If you don't have that other half, you can't say your analysis is right, and you can't say it's wrong. You can only say you haven't done it. So when people say to me, is climate science credible? I say, it could be, if they ever studied anything. In other words, if they studied the alternatives compared to, what they're sort of indirectly saying needs to be done, which is spend trillions of dollars on reducing CO2. That's one way to go. Water has not risen yet. Here's my other problem with climate change. You remember we talked yesterday, if you were on my Periscope, about how I was making fun of people who say that the president is influenced most by the last person he talks to. And then I said, that just describes everybody all the time. We're always more influenced by the last person we talk to just because of the recency of it. Right? That's just the normal way our brains work. And this is a big problem with this climate science argument. So if there's one thing I could fix, it's that we all see arguments in a silo. So on Twitter for the last couple of days, a pro-climate scientist type of person who knows far more than I know has questioned me on an element of the measurements, right? Now, when I look at the information from the expert, I say to myself, I don't know, that looks pretty credible to me. I mean, in terms of being accurate, it looks totally accurate. But here's the problem, because I know this from experience. Other people put links, on the Twitter exchange, and they're saying, well, what about this skeptical thing? What about this skeptical thing? And if I click over to those skeptical things, I'm going to read just the skeptical argument without the counter argument. And will it be convincing? Yeah, totally, because I'm not a scientist. I'm going to look at a chart. I don't really know who created it. I don't know what the counter argument is to it. I don't know if they've included all the variables. How could I? But I'm going to look at this frickin' chart, and it's going to say, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to say, well, yeah, how would I know? And then somebody's going to say, forget that sham chart. Come look at my totally agreed upon by the scientist chart. It's so much better. And then I'll go look at that chart, and I'll say, I don't know. Maybe. How the hell am I going to know if your scientific chart is accurate? How does this tell me anything? So again, the people who are the least knowledgeable about climate science are the people who say they're sure about climate science. If you're sure, you've given it away, right? You could be right, because somebody's going to be right? There are people on both sides of the argument. Somebody's going to be right, and there's going to be a lot of them. But if you're sure, there's something wrong with your thinking. The whole world agrees about climate change. Yeah, and if that means anything to you, you need to check your thinking. It may be a fact. Here, let me give you another example. You remember when we heard that 17 intelligence agencies all had the same opinion about whatever it was? And I think they've all had the opinion probably on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and there have been other times when many agencies agreed. In the real world, those agencies are not duplicating each other's work. They're not doing the same work they're not doing the same work and then coming to the same conclusion. In all likelihood, one agency takes the lead and the others look at whatever they produce and say, well, we trust these guys, so we're on. Right? So 17 agencies agree. Probably means one or two did the work, and the rest of them just looked at whatever they produced and said, yeah, they usually do good work. Yeah, I'm on board. That's really different than 17 agencies agreed. With climate change, how many of the scientists have done all of the work, from soup to nuts? How many have actually traveled to each measuring station, looked at it, measured it directly, compared it to another measurement so they know they're getting good measurements from these hundreds of different places, and then went back and worked through every possible climate science change? Well, some, but some have, and maybe hundreds have, right? But when you say 97% of scientists agree, you're mostly looking at people who just agreed with a few people who have done the real work. Most people may have, done a part of it. They may have read what other people wrote, didn't see a big problem with it, trusted people who are in the same field. So whenever you hear 100 people agree on anything technical, it usually means a few people did the work, and most of the people just said, well, we trust those guys. We're in the same job. They probably did a good job. Why do you value credibility over accuracy? I don't. I wish Jordan Peterson were watching that question, because there's nothing I said that valued credibility over accuracy. If you have a choice, accuracy plus credibility is best. Depending on the situation, and certainly anything that could kill you, you would want to get accuracy first. But there are lots of situations where accuracy isn't really the question. The abortion question is a good example. The abortion is not about accuracy, even though you could argue, it's a factual question whether the fetus is alive or not. But that's sort of still opinion, right? So in that case, credibility wins. In the case of climate change, you would want to have both accuracy and credibility. Let's talk about North Korea. Did anybody notice the Reuters article about North Korea? I haven't seen it's weird, but I don't see anything about that on CNN. I wonder if that's a real story. I'm going to go to the other side of the world and see if there's anything about North Korea. So the North Korea story seems to have disappeared. Let me see if it's anywhere. Korea unification. I worry that I tweeted a fake Reuters. No, here it is. So North Korea sends a rare announcement. So it's rare for Kim Jong-un to make an announcement to the world, I guess, to all Koreans, asking for unification. And he's looking for a breakthrough in unification, which would promote, quote, contact, travel, and cooperation between North and South. Now, you may remember my 100-year plan for unification. My 100-year plan for unification starts with small credibility steps, such as contact, travel, and cooperation. But North Korea is using this as a wedge strategy. They're trying to buddy up to South Korea through these, what I assume are fairly popular proposals in South Korea. And that would put a wedge between South Korea and the United States. So North Korea would like to be friendlier with South Korea, and it would like to keep its nukes. And it would like to cut the United States out of the deal, basically, and just keep our nukes, and we'll unify. Now, I have suggested that the only way to a successful conclusion here, given that the United States will keep squeezing individuals and companies, that was the news yesterday, that the U.S. is going after, and other allies, I assume, after individuals and companies and banks. So the squeeze is sort of an infinite squeeze on North Korea's economy. We're not going to say, hey, North Korea, China, do whatever do what you can. Oh, I guess you failed. I guess we're done. Trump is just going to squeeze as long as it takes, and that could be forever. If we choke out their entire economy, he's going to do that. Right? So that's different. So North Korea's sort of got a reason to come to the table. But the only way this is going to come to a good conclusion, as far as I can tell, is if we make a deal that effectively turns North Korea into Switzerland of the East. And by that I mean an entire worldwide agreement, let's say the United Nations, including 100% of the Security Council. If we vote to simply designate them a no-go zone for any attack for any reason ever, so long as they don't attack anybody else, in return for getting rid of their nukes. Now, if North Korea took that deal, they would be on a fast track to having a soaring economy because money would just flow in, and they're starting from such a low base, that they could, sort of double their economy every year for a while. If they were to take that deal, they would be taking some risk because the United States has not played fair with Libya and Iraq, some would say. But once you have all the countries guaranteeing their sovereignty, that's a different situation. There was never a case where the entire world said, look, if anybody attacks Libya, we're all going to stop it collectively. That's never happened before. So we have a never happened before path to that. Now here's the best news about this North Korea thing. Look at the deftness, the cleverness that North Korea is showing lately. You got to argue that having nukes did make them safer from attack, which is not to say we would have attacked, but it certainly made them safer at the moment that there's some risk involved to anybody who attacks. Now, that was pretty smart, but it could also be interpreted as pretty crazy. So building nukes is either really smart or really freaking crazy. So remember 2 years ago when we were talking about North Korea, it was popular to say he was crazy because he's building nukes and he's, causing disaster and starving his people and everything else. Today, and by the way, I think Trump was the first, notable figure to say this guy may not be crazy, he might be clever. And I was saying it about the same time. I was saying, don't assume this guy is crazy, because he's not showing crazy tells. He's doing things that could be crazy and could be smart, but nothing is clearly crazy. Now we watch what he's done with the Olympics, and now with this statement, and all timed in about the right time because they don't do missile testing in this phase anyway. So he can claim he didn't stop testing missiles. He can just claim, well, it's winter. We don't test in the winter. So he's doing this unification move. He's getting friendly with South Korea. What you should take away from this is that he's capable, clever, and sane. Do you know what that means? If Kim Jong-un is all of those things, capable, clever, and sane, it's fixable. The situation in which it's not fixable is if he's crazy. But apparently he's not. And we have the best evidence we've ever seen of this with his latest move. I would say that you could have still wondered up until yesterday. Yesterday, I think we just have to say, whatever you thought about him before, you have to discard that. He is clearly capable, clever, meaning smart, and he's making the right moves. When you see all of that, and by the way, even though his moves are a wedge strategy, meaning that they're strategic moves to kind of cut the United States out and to keep their nukes. So even though there's a military-ish, not even ish, there's a military purpose to being nice to South Korea, it's also moving in the opposite direction of war. All right, at least temporarily. So you see him making every right move at the moment. Every right move. You've also seen President Trump, and this is just as important, make every right move. When he was scaring North Korea, look what that did. North Korea went from, and follow this point, this is very important, until there was President Trump, North Korea believed, obviously, I think this is an obvious conclusion, they believed that building nuclear weapons made them safer. All right, let's see if you'd agree with the first part of the statement. That prior to President Trump, that North Korea, its current leader and prior leader, thought that building nuclear weapons in North Korea made them safer. President Trump, I propose, has changed that calculation. Today, building nuclear weapons and missiles to deliver them, President Trump has convinced him that that's making them less safe. Don't you think he's done that? He certainly made their economy less safe, and he's certainly saber-rattling and moving, assets around them as if attack could happen any moment. So the calculation in North Korea has just changed. That has never happened before. Nobody has ever done that before. Somebody saying I'm mind reading, and I like that comment because if you're accusing somebody of mind reading to say, well, that's what they're thinking, that is the right kind of skepticism. So the burden should be on me to prove that I'm not doing mind reading. All right. So I'm going to say that the first part of my statement doesn't require mind reading because they were building the nukes. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't put that much effort into something to make yourself less safe. Right? There's no scenario where they could be thinking anything else. That doesn't mean I'm right, but I can't think of any scenario why you would put so much effort into something to make yourself less safe. Obviously, it was to do it to become more safe because there's no other alternative explanation. Currently, we can also observe that saber-rattling and threatening North Korea, it's fair to say that no matter who was on the other end of that they would feel less safe. All right. So when people threaten you with nuclear annihilation, do you feel as safe as you used to or less safe? I don't think there's any mind reading involved there. I think it's clear that North Korea went from these nukes are making us safe, or at least safer than we would have been, to this is not so safe anymore. Is it still true that the longer the Mueller investigation goes on, the better for Trump? It does seem that way, because I think a lot of people who thought it was going to produce something are pretty skeptical. And now that we've seen the text from Agent Strzok, who said, now, and it's important to note, that Strzok made the following comment before seeing any evidence of any Russia, anything. It was before he was even assigned to the case. He said he thought there was going to be no there, and he was pretty confident about that. So so even though that was before he had seen any evidence or dug into the case, people are going to hear that who were positive that they could see the Russia problem, like ahead of time, and they're going to see that a trained agent who hates the president, he didn't see anything, at least before the investigation started. And so far I haven't seen anything yet. So that's going to have an impact on the people who thought there was something there. Now the real question is, when Mueller comes out with some kind of a report eventually, and it does not indict the president, what are the people going to do who believe that he was going to jail over all this? How are they going to deal with the degree of wrongness which is coming at them? They dealt with the election by saying, well, We were right about everything except there are more racists in the country than we ever imagined. And they say, well, but Hillary did win the popular vote. All right, so the election, they still had some outs for their ego, but they keep being wrong about his first year, being successful. It was blockbuster first year. What's going to happen when they're wrong about this Russia thing? Well, what you think would be wrong is that they would capitulate and say, all right, I finally admit that everything I've been thinking has been, about the president anyway, has been wrong for years straight. So I give up, I now support him. That's not going to happen. People can't make that big of a leap. Instead, they're going to say, so here's what it will be. Mueller, let's say Mueller comes out with a final report that does not accuse the president of doing anything illegal. There's still going to be something in the wording, the detail, that gives people reason to believe that he still was guilty. All right? So I think that no matter what happens with Mueller, the people who read his report are going to say, yeah, but look at this word he used, and he should have dug into this more, and he probably only stopped because the president threatened to fire him, or there are going to be a million excuses for why Mueller's report that shows the president harmless, or shows the president not guilty of a crime. The people who were positive that there was going to be one are just going to say, yeah, it's really there. They just didn't find it. They will rewrite the movie in their head. Is Mueller mistaken in questioning Trump? No, he should definitely. Mueller needs to question anybody who might know something. There shouldn't be any exceptions to that. Are North Koreans susceptible to cognitive dissonance? Of course. All right, I'm just reading your comments here. So let me give you some alternate explanations for things you're seeing in the news. If you watch Fox News, you're seeing a string of events being connected, which are that the Democrats paid for the dossier, and then the FBI used the dossier, which may not be accurate, to open an investigation on a political enemy of the Clintons. And therefore, this is all some terrible collusion, coup, whatever. That's possible. Now, nothing I said there necessarily is false. But here's another filter to put on exactly that same set of facts. The same set of facts are that there was opposition research funded by first an anti-Trumper, Republican, and then later by Democrats on behalf of Hillary. Now, opposition research is legal, done all the time. So far, nobody's done any crimes, right? There's just opposition research. Now, if, as claimed, the opposition research turned up something that the FBI ought to know about if it were true, that Steele agent guy kind of had to show it to the FBI. Did he have a choice? If you were sitting on opposition research that you weren't sure it was true, but if it were true, it might have put the President of the United States in a blackmail situation, can you not show that to the FBI? So the innocent explanation is they were just doing opposition research. They kicked up something that might have been false, probably was false, but it was important enough that you couldn't not show it to the FBI. You just couldn't. You just had to. You had to show it to the FBI because it was something that could have been important if it was true. So assuming that there's something nefarious in that whole dossier thing, maybe. But the far more common explanation is they were doing ordinary opposition research and saw something that they thought the FBI reasonably needed to see, and the rest just happened. Let's do a similar thing with Comey. So if you think that that Comey wrote the exoneration letter for Clinton ahead of time because the, quote, fix was in, if you think of it that way, you think, oh my God, the government is corrupt, the fix is in. Maybe. Can't say it didn't happen. You can't say they weren't thinking that. But here's an alternative explanation for the same set of facts. Comey knew that the email violation that looked like, unambiguously looked like a crime would have changed the fate of the election. And he would have been the one who elected Trump. So Comey himself was thinking to himself, in all likelihood, once he saw, what the crime was, that it was obviously a crime. And if he surfaced it as a crime just weeks before the actual election, he would be the one determining who was the president of the United States. Nobody else. Our votes would be worthless. And so, as a patriot, as a servant of the people, he took an arrow in the forehead, not even in the back. He took an arrow in the forehead to allow the people to decide. Now, if he had been trying to just protect Clinton as opposed to let the people decide, his readout to Congress would not have included all of the damning evidence. Because he said pretty clearly, when he did his readout, that she did things which are unambiguously, illegal. But then he said, we've decided not to charge. He took the decision away from Lynch, which people said, hey, you can't do that. That's why he took an arrow in the forehead. So I believe that the more likely explanation, and we'll never know, because I don't think we'll ever know what Comey was thinking. So those who are saying you're mind reading again, that's exactly the right criticism to this thought. It is mind reading in the sense that if that alternative is true, well, let me put it in a different sense. You have to consider the likely explanation and the less likely explanation. And you can do that without knowing what somebody's thinking. The most likely explanation is he didn't want to change the election himself, and he wanted to leave it to the people. To me, that's the most likely explanation. The less likely explanation is that even though he was putting his cards on the table and saying, here's the crime she committed, here's me not pursuing it, he wouldn't put both of those facts in the public table unless he was showing us that he was going to let us decide. I think he would have somehow tried to shade it like, oh, I don't think she's really guilty. He would have given an opinion that she's not guilty. If he was just in the tank for her, I think. Why isn't the FBI going after Hillary post-loss? Well, again, that's just not good for the country. So independent of whether Hillary Clinton did a crime with those emails, it just would be terrible precedent for the country to go after the loser. You don't want the winning candidate to go after to use the tools of government that were inherited by the win and use them directly against your opponent you just ran against. All right, the credibility of the government, again, here's that credibility thing. The credibility of the government requires that you let her skate even if she's guilty. Sorry. It's just more important to preserve the republic than it is to punish this one person. Likewise, Comey's decision to not take the decision out of the voters' hands and let us just look at the evidence and vote any way we wanted, that gave us the most credible election. Even though everybody's unhappy about the, or a lot of people are unhappy about the Electoral College, but the most credible outcome is that the people decided, not the FBI decided who's president. So you can hate that somebody got away with a crime, but you can't tell me that you would have gotten a more credible result with the President Trump winning, because Comey took her off the playing field. There can't be two sets of laws, Scott. Yeah, there really can. So let me tell you the dumbest criticism I ever get. When I talk about Trump, I'm usually talking about persuasion, which makes people say, yeah, but what about right and wrong and morality and all that? And then people say, but you're saying that the ends justify the means. This might require the beard. So allow me to do an impression of my critics who say to me, Scott, are you saying that the ends justify the means? The ends justify the means? Well, let me be very clear. The ends almost always justify the means. In the real world, yeah, the ends do justify the means. And guess what? The world has more than two variables. Sometimes the greater good requires, stepping on somebody's head. Sometimes to win a war, you know that innocent people would be killed. There's almost nothing we could do with immigration, with taxes, with healthcare. There's almost nothing we could do that's a big decision that doesn't screw somebody. So do the ends justify the means? Can we get to good healthcare without doctors making less money? Bad example, but, well, maybe we can't. Maybe somebody who's making money will have to make less money in order for healthcare to be affordable, right? Do the ends justify the means? We're making people poorer. Yeah, the ends justify the means. Yeah, they do. In the real world, if you're a grown-up, all of your decisions are grown-up decisions. If you take the president's tough line on immigration, is it fair to some groups? I don't think so. Of course it's not fair. Do the ends justify the means? Yeah, totally. Because a stable world is a good thing, and not having terrorists is a good thing, and we're not obligated to let anybody in particular in. And so if we make a decision that's bad for some people but looks like it's statistically good for us, yeah, the ends totally justified the means. So the dumbest thing anybody ever says to me, that's a hard competition, is that, are you saying that the ends justify the means? To be perfectly clear, yes, in all things. In general, that's the most common situation, is the ends are justifying the means. That's why you do it, right? Everything has a cost, but the ends justify the means. Please define justify. Sure, the benefits outweigh the costs. Everything that you do, if you're being, credible and responsible, is you're weighing all the costs, moral and economic and every other cost, and you're weighing all the potential benefits, whatever those are, and you're saying, oh, these benefits are greater than the costs. Does that mean that the ends justified the means? Yeah, that's exactly what that means. When the benefits are greater than the costs, the ends have justified the means. Yes. Spying on a candidate too? Well, it would depend. If you were spying on a candidate that you legitimately believed was a Russian spy and you had credible reason to believe that, but spying was illegal, but it was the only way to find out that, we had a Russian spy as a president or something. Yeah, totally. The ends would totally justify the means. If Comey did what I'm speculating he did, which is allow the American citizens to make a decision, but part of the cost of that is that somebody, in this case Hillary Clinton, was not treated equally under the law with poor people, do the ends of having a fair election with greater credibility justify not having exact application of the law in this one case? Yes, totally. They totally justify that. That's the point. So people are saying no. Are you? This is just a head shaker. I don't know. The ones who are saying that the ends don't justify the means in terms of having a fair election in which the people get to choose versus Comey having Hillary arrested. Those of you who think that equal application of the law is so important that you'd rather have an unstable government, I don't think you're serious thinkers. That's just not a serious point of view. A stable government, given that there would be literally a risk of civil war, of the most powerful military in the country, a civil war, would you risk that because one person should go to jail about some email stuff that probably she didn't do? And, it's just crazy. That's a crazy trade-off to me. Totally disagree. Well, here's the thing. If you were risking the precedent that rich people will get away with breaking the law, I would totally agree with you. But that's not really what's happening. Here we're comparing one person who had a technical legal problem with email, which is legitimately against the law, the way she handled the email, versus the stability of the republic. Those are not really even close. It's not like other people are going to do illegal things with email and say, well, Hillary got away with it. A presidential election is a one-off. There's nothing exactly like that. There's no precedent there for the public. We didn't have a civil war after Nixon. Well, that was all, even Nixon's Watergate stuff, the system was working. The system tracked that down and rooted it out. That wasn't really something that was going to trigger a revolution. But Trump was a more polarizing character. So by his nature, he made things a little less stable. So you add on top of that, he won the election running against nobody. Oh my God, that would have been bad. Doesn't the Russia probe risk a civil war? Does it? Does the Russia probe risk a civil war? I don't see it. Now, as long as the process is credible and Mueller tells us everything he found, I think we're fine. It doesn't seem like a risk to me. Biden could have stepped in, yeah, but that would have been quite a disadvantage. What movie are the birthers watching? Yeah, well, anybody's going to believe something. All right, I think I've said enough for today. I'm going to take off and do some other stuff. What if they find money laundering? They're not going to find any money laundering. The rich people bought property in Trump Towers. Where they got their money, I'm not sure that's up to the Trumps to figure out. Okay.